Welcome to this explainer. We're diving straight into the immense stakes of the Battle of Uhud. We're going to unpack exactly how the Quranic chapter Surah Al-Imran serves as a literal, divine autopsy of this pivotal historical event. Looking closely at the source material, you'll see this wasn't just your standard military clash. No, it's a profoundly deep lesson in discipline, strategy, and ultimate accountability.
So, here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the revenge of Badr, move into the strategy of Uhud, look at the fatal mistake, the turning of the tide, and finally wrap up with the Quranic commentary and accountability. We're going to meticulously break this battle down chronologically, from the initial setup to the devastating climax, and finally those deep theological takeaways.
Part 1. Revenge of Badr. To truly understand Uhud, we've got to start with the Quraysh's burning thirst for revenge. Just a year earlier, they suffered a humiliating defeat at the Battle of Badr. 70 of their top leaders, including Abu Jahl, were killed. According to the sources, there wasn't a single household in Mecca that wasn't mourning a loss. They spent an entire year preparing for one thing: to wash away that dishonor.
Now, look at the stark contrast in motivation between the two sides. The Quraysh army was so absolutely terrified of fleeing a second time that they actually brought their own women and children to the battlefield. I mean, think about that. Their logic was that their immense pride and the fear of their families being captured would literally force them to fight to the death. On the flip side, the Muslim army was defending Medina, and they were heavily driven by the sheer zeal of younger companions who were just super eager to fight outside the city walls.
The numerical mismatch here was absolutely massive. The Quraysh marched in with a fully equipped army of 3,000 soldiers. The Muslims? Well, they initially marched out with 1,000, but they suffered a severe psychological blow before a single sword was even swung. A hypocrite named Abdullah bin Ubay betrayed them and retreated with 300 of his men. That left a mere 700 defenders. That's less than a quarter of the enemy's size, and they were up against a heavily armed, highly motivated force.
Moving into Section 2, Strategy of Uhud. Despite those crazy odds, the Prophet deployed a brilliant defensive master plan, and it was entirely based on majority consultation. The source really highlights this. Even though the Prophet personally preferred to defend from within the city, he yielded to the majority vote of the energetic youth who wanted to march out. It really shows a profound commitment to consultation and shared decision-making.
So let's look at the execution phase. This builds into a virtually perfect defensive strategy to counter the Quraysh's heavily armed cavalry. Recognizing they were drastically outnumbered, the Muslims took up positions right at the base of Mount Uhud. This completely protected their backs. Their only major vulnerability was a small mountain pass where enemy cavalry could potentially flank them.
Even if you see birds flying away with our flesh, do not leave this hill until I command you. That is a chillingly specific order. It was given to 50 expert archers stationed right on that critical hill, under the command of Abdullah bin Jubair. The Prophet made it abundantly clear, regardless of a sweeping victory or a catastrophic defeat, they were absolutely not to move. It really underscores how crucial discipline was to this entire plan.
Part 3. The Pass and the Fatal Mistake. So, the battle kicks off with a rapid Muslim success. The Quraysh's lines broke, they started fleeing the battlefield, and they even abandoned their camp. But this initial victory unraveled incredibly fast due to a catastrophic lapse in discipline.
Seeing the enemy retreat and watching their fellow soldiers gather the spoils of war, there was a stark split among the archers. 35 of them used their own ijtihad, their independent judgment, and abandoned their posts. They just assumed the battle was totally over and that the Prophet's command only applied while active fighting was happening. Only 15 archers, along with their commander, stayed put, literally begging the others to remember those explicit orders they were just given.
The tide turned in a matter of seconds. Khalid bin Walid, who was commanding the Qurayshi cavalry, had this incredibly keen tactical eye. Following the sequence of events, he instantly recognized that abandoned pass. He didn't hesitate. He led his horsemen around the mountain, easily overwhelmed those remaining 15 archers, and launched a devastating cavalry attack right from the rear. The Muslim army was completely sandwiched.
Section 4. Turning of the tide. In mere minutes, that flawless strategy we just talked about, it dissolved into absolute chaos. The Muslims had broken formation to gather spoils, and now they were trapped right between the returning infantry and the charging cavalry.
The sheer panic led to unthinkable tragedy. The dust and confusion were so thick it actually resulted in friendly fire. Most notably, Jabir bin Abdullah's father was tragically killed by his own allies in the absolute madness of it all. The Muslim army's commander, Hamza, was martyred and brutally mutilated by Hind. And perhaps most devastatingly, a rumor swept like wildfire across the battlefield that the Prophet himself had been killed. This psychological blow was so severe that many demoralized fighters simply dropped their swords right there.
The physical toll on the Prophet was severe too. His helmet was crushed, driving metal rings deep into his cheek, and he lost 4 teeth. But the bravery of the companions who formed a literal human shield around him was just extraordinary. The sources specifically highlight Talha, who sacrificed the use of his hand by using it to physically block incoming arrows aimed at the Prophet. Later on, Ali and Fatima would meticulously clean his wounds.
Part 5. Quranic Commentary and Accountability. This brings us to the absolute most critical part of our explainer today. We're looking at the divine autopsy of the battle through Surah Al-Imran. The source emphasizes that these 60 verses serve as a live, real-time commentary, a meticulous debrief from the divine about exactly where the Muslims went wrong.
So, why did Allah allow defeat when the Prophet was literally right there on the battlefield? That is the ultimate question we have to ask. And the source materials analysis provides a profoundly striking answer. I mean, how could an army fighting for a righteous cause, with a prophet physically standing among them, suffer such a bitter defeat? The lesson here is incredibly stark. Victory requires absolute discipline. The rule of cause and effect is universal. If you break strategic orders, you are going to face the consequences, and it doesn't matter what your spiritual status is or who is leading you. The divine rules of strategy simply do not bend, not even for the most faithful.
The Quranic reprimand was definitely harsh, but it was absolutely necessary. Think about it. Allah was preparing this small army for massive future conflicts against military superpowers like the Roman and Persian empires. If they were losing discipline in a local skirmish, how on earth could they face professional empires later? Plus, the archer's mistake proves a core theological and legal point. Independent judgment, or ijtihad, is completely invalid when it directly contradicts a clear, explicit command.
This leads to an incredible moment of divine accountability. As the prophet bled from his wounds, he naturally wondered aloud how a people who did this to their prophet could ever be guided. But revelation immediately descended to correct him, stating, "You have no authority in this matter." Allah asserts absolute authority over guidance, reminding everyone, even the prophet, that ultimate outcomes rest solely with the divine, not with human emotion.
And this brilliantly illustrates the unpredictability of history and the sheer depth of that previous verse. The very architect of their bloody defeat, the man who nearly destroyed the Muslim army at Uhud, would later convert to Islam. Yep, Khalid bin Walid would go on to become the Sword of Allah, the legendary general who ultimately dismantled both the Persian and Roman empires for the Muslims. Talk about irony.
It all leaves us with an incredibly powerful reflection on accountability. The source material uses the tragedy of Uhud to prove that faith alone isn't enough. True success always demands rigorous discipline and adherence to strategy. If a single lapse in judgment on a hillside could unravel a guaranteed victory, it really forces us to ask, what strategies are we abandoning in our own lives for short-term gains? Keep that in mind. I hope this explainer gave you a clear, structured understanding of this monumental historical event.